These visuals from Bangladesh show protesters tearing down the statues of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the country's first president, who was once hailed as the greatest Bengali of all time. A freedom fighter who fought against not only the British but also Pakistan, Mujibur Rahman was considered by many Bangladeshis as the father of the nation, and today his statues across the country lie broken. His daughter Sheikh Hasina, who was until recently the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, has fled the nation. So what's happening in Bangladesh? India's eastern neighbor is currently facing a significant political and social crisis, one that has sent shockwaves throughout the region. What began as student protests has snowballed into a full-blown political crisis, forcing Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina to resign and flee to India. This crisis raises many questions about what's happening in Bangladesh, the impact of the crisis on the nation's Hindu minorities, and what the implications are for the region, particularly India. Let's answer these questions one by one. So, how did this crisis begin? Sheikh Hasina has been a dominant figure in Bangladeshi politics for over a decade, steering the nation as the leader of the Bangladesh Awami League political party. Then in June 2024, Bangladeshi students began protesting against a controversial government quota system. This quota system reserved a significant percentage of public sector jobs for specific groups like descendants of freedom fighters, women, and other minorities. It was initially implemented to promote equality, but over time the quota system became a source of discontent, especially among the country's younger generation, who felt that it unfairly limited their opportunities. This dissatisfaction boiled over into large-scale protests which quickly gained momentum across the nation. In response to growing unrest, Bangladesh's judiciary stepped in and struck down the quota system. However, by the time this decision was made, protests had already morphed into a broader movement against Sheikh Hasina's government. The streets of Dhaka and other major cities became battlegrounds, with angry demonstrators clashing with security forces. This marked a significant escalation in the crisis as the protesters' demands expanded beyond the quota system to include broader calls for political change. Reports suggest that the movement was infiltrated by radical elements who sought to exploit the unrest for their own purposes. These more radical groups included rivals of the Awami League, such as the banned Islamist party Jamaat-e-Islami, and elements within the Bangladesh Nationalist Party or BNP. They began taking the protests towards a more violent direction. The situation grew increasingly chaotic, with clashes leading to a significant loss of life. To date, nearly 200 people have been killed in the unrest, with many more injured. The violence has been particularly brutal in areas with significant minority populations, where Hindus and other non-Muslim communities have faced targeted attacks. The Bangladeshi news outlet The Daily Star has reported that several Hindu houses, temples, and businesses across the country were targeted and attacked. The house of Bangladeshi Hindu musician Rahul Ananda was also set ablaze by radical elements. The human cost of the crisis has been staggering. The country's infrastructure has suffered extensive damage. Government buildings, including police stations and Awami League offices, have been torched and vehicles have been set on fire. As protests escalated, the situation turned worse on the 5th of August when protesters stormed the presidential palace in Dhaka, making it difficult for Sheikh Hasina to continue as Prime Minister. In the face of this mounting pressure, Sheikh Hasina fled Bangladesh and sought refuge in India, leaving behind her nation teetering on the edge of chaos. However, there are signs that a foreign hand was involved in this crisis as well. In June 2023, the US had announced a new visa policy for Bangladesh to support free, fair, and peaceful parliamentary elections in the country. The policy would restrict the visa for individuals whom the US believed to have undermined Bangladeshi democracy. In November 2023, the US ambassador to Bangladesh also sought meetings with leaders of 3 major political parties. The US has been asking Bangladesh to sign 2 defense pacts for many years, but with no success. The US also criticized the Bangladeshi elections in January 2024. In a recent confession, Sheikh Hasina admitted that she could have stayed in power if she had agreed to cede control of Saint Martin Island, a strategically important location in the Bay of Bengal. The island, which is located near the maritime border between Bangladesh and Myanmar, is of significant strategic importance due to its proximity to key shipping lanes and its potential as a military outpost. Hasina's refusal to give up control of the island may have been a factor in the escalation of the crisis. Hasina had earlier made a more shocking claim that there were plans to create a Christian nation in northern Bangladesh, northern Myanmar, and northeast India. This, she argues, is part of a broader strategy to exert pressure on China. These controversial claims have been met with skepticism, but they add another layer of complexity to the crisis. The face of Bangladesh's interim government as of now is Muhammad Yunus, a Nobel laureate who is closely affiliated with the US State Department. Appointed as chief advisor to the interim Bangladeshi government, Yunus is a Fulbright scholarship recipient from the US government and has also been awarded the US Presidential Medal of Freedom and the US Congressional Gold Medal. Now the protests in Bangladesh also bear a striking resemblance to other regime change operations seen in recent history. The Iranian Revolution of 1979 and the Arab Spring in the early 2010s are prime examples of how genuine movements for change can be co-opted by radical elements and even foreign agencies. In these cases, the initial movements were driven by widespread dissatisfaction with the status quo, but they were eventually hijacked by more extreme forces. The result was the replacement of one form of authoritarianism with another, often more repressive regime. The situation in Bangladesh appears to follow a similar pattern, with the risk that the vacuum left by Hasina's departure could be filled by even more radical elements from the Bangladesh Nationalist Party and Jamaat-e-Islami. This fear has already been proven right by the targeted attack on the nation's Hindu minorities. So, what are the consequences of this crisis in Bangladesh on India? What is India doing about it? For India, the crisis in Bangladesh poses significant challenges. The prospect of a refugee crisis looms large, with thousands of Bangladeshis likely to seek refuge across the border if the situation continues to deteriorate. This adds to the already significant challenges India is facing in managing its borders and could strain relations between the two countries. Moreover, a destabilized Bangladesh, particularly if it falls under the control of radical groups, could pose a serious security threat to India. The potential for increased cross-border terrorism and the spread of extremist ideologies are significant concerns for Indian policymakers. In response to this crisis, the Indian government has created a high-level panel to monitor the Bangladeshi crisis and ensure that the Hindu minorities are safe. In conclusion, Bangladesh is at a critical crossroads. The crisis has already had a devastating impact on the country, and the consequences are likely to be felt far beyond its borders. The world is watching the unfolding situation closely, but for India and the region, the stakes have never been higher. The coming weeks and months will be crucial in determining the future of Bangladesh and its role in the regional geopolitical landscape.